Most organizations believe Power Platform is about empowerment. They buy into the idea of user empowerment and business user empowerment, imagining a world where non-technical people build apps faster than ever. That is the narrative Microsoft sells, it is what the webinars promise, and it is exactly what your business stakeholders think they are getting. They are wrong. Power Platform is not a democratization tool. In reality, it is a control plane designed for capturing enterprise value that your organization is systematically hemorrhaging through manual entropy. That distinction matters because it changes how you price the opportunity, how you position it internally, and how you eventually scale it across the entire organization. We are not talking about citizen developers building hobby apps in their spare time. This is architectural arbitrage at an enterprise scale. You have to understand why manual processes cost you $2,500 per employee every single year, while pro-code solutions demand $150,000 to $500,000 per capability. Power Platform performs equivalent work for $5,000 to $25,000, and it finishes the job in weeks instead of months. This is about recognizing that your organization is not misconfigured. It is architected for entropy. Power Platform is the lever that fixes it. The hidden cost of manual entropy. Manual processes do more than just waste time. They compound organizational debt at exponential rates. Yet most organizations treat this as a normal operational cost rather than an engineering problem to solve. Start with the baseline. US companies face an average cost of $28,500 per employee annually in manual data entry alone, and that figure does not even include the downstream effects. It ignores error correction and skips over compliance risk entirely. That is the pure labor cost of repetitive rule-based work that should never require human judgment in the first place. Finance and IT roles usually face the worst of it. These are your highest paid employees, earning $50 to $90 per hour, yet they are spending 20 or more hours every week on simple data movement. They spend their time copying information from one system to another, or validating that what was entered yesterday is still correct today. They are constantly chasing missing information because a form was not filled out completely. 56% of employees report burnout from these manual tasks. This is not simple dissatisfaction or minor frustration. It is burnout, the specific kind that leads to turnover and costs you 50 to 200% of a salary just to find a replacement. The error rate only compounds the problem. A 1% error rate per field means you will find one error in every 5 records, which explains why 50.4% of operations face delays and compliance issues. These problems do not stem from system failures, but from human transcription mistakes and the inevitable fatigue that comes with repetitive work. Now, this is where it gets expensive. Organizations accept this waste as normal, so they budget for it and staff around it. They build processes that assume errors will happen, and then they plan for the inevitable rework. But this is where the arbitrage emerges. A single workflow automation costs between $5,000 and $25,000. A pro-code solution for that same capability costs $150,000 to $500,000, and it usually takes 3 to 6 months to deliver. Power Platform delivers equivalent capability in 2 to 4 weeks. The math is not subtle, it is not close, it is structural. Consider a manufacturing firm processing 10,000 monthly transactions at a 1.6% error rate. They are losing 160 errors per month, and at $50 per error fix, that adds up to $8,000 monthly in pure rework. That is $96,000 annually from a single process, and that is before you account for late payments, compliance findings, or customer dissatisfaction from delays. The transition point is simple. When the cost of a manual process exceeds the cost of automation, entropy becomes a balance sheet liability. When you are spending more money on correcting errors than you would spend automating the process, you have moved from operational necessity to financial negligence. Most organizations never bother to make this calculation. They see the labor cost as sunk, they see the error rate as inevitable, and they see the delay as acceptable friction. They are leaving millions on the table. The real arbitrage is this. Manual entropy is expensive and pro-code solutions are expensive. Low code is cheap. The gap between cheap and expensive is where your competitive advantage lives. The pro-code versus low-code economic reality. Let's be precise about the economics because the numbers tell you everything you need to know about why this arbitrage exists. Pro-code development for a single business application typically runs anywhere from $40,000 to $250,000. That is the build cost alone, and it usually requires 3 to 6 months of delivery time while you hunt for specialized developers and architects. You need QA teams, infrastructure setups, and complex deployment pipelines, but the real weight is the ongoing maintenance. You will pay 20% of that initial cost every single year, forever, and that 20% does not just sit there, it compounds. Consider a team of 3 developers working for 6 months at a fully loaded cost of $180,000. That project is already hitting the $500,000 mark before you even account for testing or the massive opportunity cost of pulling those people away from other work. Low-code through the Power Platform delivers that same capability for $3,000 to $15,000. Delivery happens in 2 to 4 weeks, often with citizen developers participating, which means you skip the specialized hiring cycle and the infrastructure headaches entirely. Maintenance costs drop to 15% of the initial investment, making the math look less like a competition and more like a blowout. It is not even close. At scale, this gap widens in a way that is almost catastrophic for traditional budgets. Deploying 10 pro-code solutions will cost you $1.5 million or more, while 10 Power Platform solutions cost maybe $100,000. That represents a 70% reduction in structural costs. And that is not a marketing claim or a best-case scenario. It is just how the math works. But cost is only half of the arbitrage, because the other half is time to value. Pro-code usually requires at least 6 months to realize any return on investment, which means your business case assumes you will wait half a year just to see a payback. During those 6 months of waiting, the manual process continues to fail, errors keep happening, and compliance risks keep piling up. You are essentially paying interest on a problem while you wait for a solution that is still months away. Power Platform achieves a full payback in 4 to 6 weeks, which completely flips the business case on its head. You deploy in weeks and measure the impact immediately, seeing error reductions in days and cycle time compression within the very first month. This allows you to reinvest those savings into the next automation before a pro-code team would have even finished their first sprint. That 70% cost reduction compounds over time. If you deploy 10 capabilities using pro-code, you spend over $1 million and wait half a year for each one to go live. If you use Power Platform, you spend a fraction of that and have all 10 in production within 3 months, allowing you to measure ROI on the first tool while the second is still in development. The hidden margin here is organizational learning. Every Power Platform deployment teaches the team something new, and every citizen developer you train becomes a force multiplier for the next project. Successful automations become templates for future work, whereas pro-code projects often exist in a vacuum. Each custom solution is a unique snowflake, and when a team member leaves, they take that proprietary knowledge with them, forcing the next project to restart the learning curve from zero. Organizations typically reinvest 80% of their Power Platform savings back into more automations, which creates a compounding efficiency engine. In the first year, you might automate 10 workflows and save $200,000, but by year 2, you use that freed capacity to automate 20 more. By year 3, you are hitting 40 workflows and saving over $1 million annually. Pro-code simply cannot scale this way because the cost structure does not allow it. You cannot afford to deploy 40 custom-coded solutions because the economics eventually break under their own weight. This is why the arbitrage exists. It is not because Power Platform is technically superior in every way, but because the cost structure of low-code creates a structural gap that smart organizations exploit. The real question is not whether Power Platform can do what Pro-code does, because for most enterprise workflows, it clearly can. The real question is whether you can actually afford not to use it. When you spend over $1 million to solve problems that only require $100,000, you have a pricing problem. When you wait 6 months for solutions that could be live in 4 weeks, you have a timing problem. Power Platform solves both of those issues simultaneously. That is why it functions as a money machine. It is not magical, it is just economically inevitable. Citizen developer factory model. Now let's talk about how you actually deploy this arbitrage, because understanding the economics is one thing, but building the operating model is another. The arbitrage play at scale is simple. You train 50 to 100 business users to build their own solutions, and you eliminate the IT backlog entirely. I am not talking about reducing it, I mean eliminating it. Start by looking at the baseline state of most companies. Your IT department likely has an 8-month application backlog with hundreds of pending requests, and your specialized developers are drowning. They are expensive, the business is frustrated, and priorities shift so weakly that nothing ever actually ships on time. This is not a people problem, but an architecture problem. You have centralized every single development capability into one team, which means all requests flow through a single funnel, and every decision requires specialized expertise. The system is literally designed to create bottlenecks. Once you deploy this new model, the situation flips. Business users begin handling 60 to 70% of routine requests, which allows IT to focus on high-level integration, security, and governance. The backlog usually clears in about 90 days, and that happens because you have distributed the workload. The economic math is very straightforward. A training investment of maybe $50,000 yields $500,000 in freed IT capacity within the first year alone. You are not replacing your developers, but you are redirecting their time away from routine requests and towards strategic work. They stop building the same approval workflow for the 100th time and start architecting the integrations that actually require their expertise. Shell famously scaled this to 4,000 citizen developers using the Power Platform. That is 4,000 business users building their own solutions, which reduces reduced their IT dependency by 65%. They enabled a digital transformation that moved 10 times faster than any traditional approach would have allowed. The governance model is the only thing that keeps this from becoming shadow IT chaos, but structured governance is not about being restrictive. It is about being an enabler. You create a zoned risk approach, starting with a green zone for citizen-built apps that get auto-approved. These are low-risk, bounded workflows like form collections or simple data visualizations that business users can build and ship in days without an IT review. Then you have an amber zone for business-critical workflows that require an IT review. These touch core processes like finance approvals or customer data where IT needs to review the logic and validate the data connections. They ensure audit trails exist before the app goes live. Finally, there is the red zone for financial and compliance systems that require full control. These are locked down and only IT builds here because these are your ERP integrations and your general ledger connections. This structure is not about exerting control but about providing speed with guardrails. Since 80% of requests live in the green zone, they move fast and unblock the business, while the remaining 20% get the scrutiny they need without creating a bottleneck for everyone else. The compounding effect is the most critical part of this model. Every successful citizen developer eventually trains 2 or 3 of their peers, which means adoption accelerates without you spending more on formal training. Knowledge spreads through the organization naturally, and best practices emerge from the people actually doing the work. The culture shifts from "we have to wait for IT" to "we can just build this ourselves." Within 18 months, you usually have a self-sustaining system where citizen developers are training each other. IT stays focused on governance and integration, the backlog stays clear, and new requests are handled in days instead of months. The business moves faster, and IT is finally respected instead of being seen as the department of no. The ROI here is not subtle at all. You have freed up hundreds of thousands in IT capacity and deployed capabilities that would have cost millions if you used pro code. You cleared a massive backlog and created a repeatable operating model that scales as the company grows. But here is what matters most. You changed the entire conversation. You moved from a centralized bottleneck to a distributed capability, and you shifted your timeline from months to weeks. That is not just a technology change. It is a total organizational transformation. It is only possible because the economics of low-code make it viable. If Power Platform cost as much as pro-code development, you could never afford to train 100 citizen developers because the ROI would never work. But it does work. The economics are so favorable that you can invest in training, governance, and infrastructure and still see a massive payback. That is why the Citizen Developer Factory is the core arbitrage play. Legacy form and spreadsheet replacement arbitrage. The most visible arbitrage play is the one every organization sees but refuses to acknowledge. I am talking about legacy forms, spreadsheets, and 15-year-old SharePoint sites. These are critical workflows running on infrastructure that should have been retired a decade ago. The baseline is brutal. You have organizations running essential operations on Excel or paper forms that require deep institutional knowledge just to function. When the person who built the spreadsheet leaves, the formulas become a mystery that nobody can solve. When a form gets lost in an email chain, the entire process stalls, and data eventually has to be manually typed from one system into another. The cost of doing nothing is quantifiable. Manual data entry carries an error rate of about 1 to 1.6% per field, which leads to delays and compliance issues for over half of all operations. Audit trails are non-existent in these environments. Finance cannot reconcile transactions, and operations cannot track process status because the data is trapped in a static file. Consider a manufacturing firm processing 10,000 monthly transactions on a legacy system. At a 1.6% error rate, they are dealing with 160 errors every single month. If each error costs $50 to fix, that is $8,000 in monthly rework alone. That figure does not even account for the audit findings or the customer dissatisfaction caused by these delays. This is where you introduce the Power Platform. You can replace a legacy form with a Power Apps interface in about 2 to 3 weeks and capture structured data directly into Dataverse. The system then auto-routes information to the correct approver based on business rules while maintaining an audit trail automatically. You are not just digitizing a form, you are eliminating manual transcription entirely. The financial impact is immediate. That same manufacturing firm can drop its error rate to less than 1% through structured data capture and validation rules. Monthly errors drop from 160 down to 100, and rework costs fall from $8,000 to $5,000. You have just saved $48,000 annually from error reduction alone. Secondary benefits compound this value. You gain real-time visibility into process status, and compliance audit trails are generated without human intervention. Frontline workers can use mobile access to capture data in the field instead of returning to the office. Because data moves through the system automatically, it no longer sits waiting in an email queue for days. Deployment timeline is a major factor here. A typical form replacement takes 15 to 20 days, meaning you realize your ROI in the first month through error reduction. This business case is not speculative. It is immediate and measurable. The transition pattern is critical if you want to scale. You start with the highest volume, highest error process and measure your baseline metrics before deploying the Power Apps form. Once you track the impact and quantify the savings, you reinvest that capital into the next automation. This creates a virtuous cycle. The first replacement saves you $50,000 annually, which you then use to replace the next legacy form. The second replacement might save $75,000 because you have learned the architectural patterns that work. By year 3, you have replaced 20 legacy systems and eliminated $500,000 in annual rework costs. The real arbitrage is found in the replacement cost. Legacy systems are expensive to maintain and support, but they are also expensive to replace if you use traditional pro-code development. A custom form replacement using traditional methods costs between $150,000 and $300,000. Power Platform does the same job for $5,000 to $15,000. You are solving the problem at a fraction of the cost that traditional approaches require. Organizations keep legacy systems alive because replacing them usually costs too much, not because the systems actually work. Power Platform changes that equation by making replacement affordable, fast, and ultimately inevitable. Accounts payable and receivable automation. Now we should look at the workflow that touches every organization's bottom line. Accounts payable and accounts receivable determine your cash flow and whether you capture early payment discounts. These processes dictate whether you pay vendors on time or if your own invoices get lost in a customer's system. The baseline economics are difficult to justify. AP teams often spend over 9 days processing a single invoice from receipt to payment. 14% of these invoices require exception handling because of a missing PO or an amount mismatch. Each exception takes additional time to investigate, and each one costs the company money to resolve. The per-invoice processing cost averages between $9 and $16 depending on how you calculate labor and rework. That is the true cost of moving an invoice through your system, and it has nothing to do with your software license. When you multiply that by volume, the numbers become staggering. A firm processing 2,000 monthly invoices at a $12 average cost is spending $30,000 a month on labor. That adds up to $360,000 annually before you even account for late fees or lost discounts. This is where the arbitrage emerges, because those 14% of invoices requiring manual intervention are straining your vendor relationships. You can introduce Power Automate with intelligent document processing to capture invoice data automatically. The system performs three-way matching to validate the PO and the receipt, flagging any mismatches without human input. Invoices are routed to the correct person based on the amount, and approvals happen in hours instead of days. Post-deployment metrics are easy to quantify. Processing time typically drops from 9 days down to just 1 or 2, and the per-invoice cost falls to about $3.25. Your exception rate will likely drop from 14% to 5% because the system identifies errors immediately. The financial impact compounds quickly. Processing 2,000 monthly invoices at the new lower cost brings your monthly spend down to $6,500. That is a monthly savings of $23,500 or $282,000 annually in labor alone. But that is not the full picture of the savings. Reducing the exception rate means you have 100 fewer exceptions to deal with every month. If each one costs $50 to resolve, you have eliminated another $60,000 in annual rework. Early pay discount capture also increases significantly. If your firm processes $2 million in annual payables, capturing an additional 1% through faster processing adds $20,000 to the bottom line. When you add it all up, the first-year benefit is over $360,000. Compare that to an implementation cost of $25,000 and a small annual licensing fee. The payback occurs in 4 to 6 months, and the ROI continues to compound in the following years. The licensing strategy is what makes this work so well. The Power Automate per-flow model is dramatically cheaper than per-user licensing for high-volume processes. One flow can handle thousands of invoices monthly, so you don't need to license every single person who clicks an approval button. This architecture allows you to store historical data in Dataverse for real-time analytics. Accounts receivable follows this same logic. You can automate payment reminders and trigger collections workflows based on the age of the invoice. The arbitrage is identical because you are taking a high-volume, rule-based process and removing the expensive manual labor. The real power here is that AP and AR automation is not theoretical. You can measure the results in weeks, and the ROI does not depend on complex organizational change. The process either works or it does not, and the money either flows or it stays stuck. This is core arbitrage because the economics are simply undeniable. Compliance automation and evidence capture. We need to address the specific arbitrage that regulators force you to acknowledge, the compliance workflow. These are the internal mechanisms that determine whether you pass an audit or face a formal finding. In architectural terms, these processes dictate whether you actually possess evidence of a control or if you are simply operating on hope. The baseline pain is remarkably consistent across industries. HIPAA audits frequently reveal that 30% of required documentation is simply missing, while SOC 2 findings routinely cite gaps in manual controls. When a GDPR data subject request arrives, it often takes weeks to fulfill because no one actually knows where the data lives or who has accessed it. You have to understand that compliance is not a technology problem. It is a documentation and evidence problem. Most organizations currently attempt to run these critical workflows using spreadsheets, fragmented email chains, and the institutional knowledge stored in a single person's head. When an auditor demands proof that you followed your own access control policy, your team ends up digging through old Outlook folders. If a regulator requests data subject information, you are forced into a manual search across disconnected systems. Hunting for email receipts to prove a transaction was approved by the right person is a sign of a failing system. This approach carries a cost that goes far beyond operational friction. It creates massive regulatory risk. When your controls are manual and undocumented, you are exactly one incident away from a catastrophic financial event. Audit findings lead to mandatory remediation timelines, and compliance breaches can easily cost between $100,000 and $1 million in fines. That is not a cumulative total, that is the cost per breach. This is where the Power Platform resolves the arbitrage by using structured workflows to capture evidence at the exact point of action. The system records who approved a request, when they did it, and the specific business rule that triggered the requirement. Because audit trails are generated automatically and access controls are enforced at the workflow level, compliance becomes an inherent property of the system. You are no longer relying on human memory to satisfy a regulator. Consider the difference this makes for a healthcare provider trying to manage patient consent. The legacy process usually involves a paper form that gets signed and buried in a physical filing cabinet. When a HIPAA auditor requests all consents from a specific date range, staff members have to spend hours or days manually searching through paper records. It is a slow, error-prone method that invites a negative finding. The Power Platform alternative changes the architecture of the record by having the patient sign a digital form on an iPad. That signature flows directly into Dataverse with a permanent timestamp and full user attribution. Because the data is structured, a Power BI dashboard can track completion rates in real time, and an audit report can be generated in minutes. The auditor gets exactly what they need in seconds, and the organization stays protected. The post-deployment impact is easy to quantify. We typically see audit findings drop by 70% because the system enforces the controls instead of suggesting them. The time required to respond to regulatory requests often drops from 3 weeks down to just 3 days because the data is searchable and verified. Compliance moves from being an assumption to being something you can prove instantly. The cost avoidance here is massive when you consider the stakes. Since a single breach can cost $1 million, enforcing controls at the workflow level is essentially an insurance policy against regulatory exposure. You're not just tidying up your operations, you are actively reducing the probability of a financial disaster. This is about protecting the balance sheet from predictable failures. You can expect a fast deployment timeline for these solutions. A standard compliance workflow usually takes about 3 to 4 weeks to implement, and the benefit is realized the moment you go live. Unlike efficiency gains that might compound slowly over time, the improvement to your risk profile is immediate and measurable. There is also a strategic secondary benefit to consider. Automation allows you to offer compliance as a core feature of your business rather than an afterthought. If you are a vendor for healthcare or financial services, having HIPAA-compliant or SOC 2 controlled workflows becomes a major competitive advantage. It turns a regulatory burden into a selling point for your most demanding customers. The real arbitrage is found in the math of prevention. Maintaining compliance manually is expensive, and proving it to an auditor after the fact is even more costly. A Power Automate workflow that captures evidence might cost you $10,000 to build, but a breach that it could have prevented costs $1 million. You are not automating these processes because it feels modern or nice to have. You are doing it because the cost of remaining manual has become existential. The economics of this decision are not subtle, they are a matter of survival. Compliance automation is a core arbitrage because it prevents the disasters that end companies. Frontline and mobile app deployment. Now we can look at the arbitrage involving your most underutilized asset, the frontline worker. These are the people in the field who should be solving customer problems. Yet they often spend their time sitting in vehicles filling out paperwork. This is a massive waste of high-value labor that most organizations simply accept as a cost of doing business. The baseline state for a field service team of 50 workers is usually grim. Each person might spend 2 or 3 hours every day on manual data entry after their shift is over. They return from the field only to sit at a desk and transcribe notes from paper forms or upload photos of receipts. When you multiply those hours across a full year, you are looking at over 30,000 hours spent on data entry that should have happened in the field. The labor cost is only the beginning of the problem. Data quality inevitably suffers when workers are tired and rushing to finish their paperwork at the end of a long day. We see error rates around 15% because someone misread handwriting or skipped a required field. Supervisors then spend 20% of their time chasing down missing info, which delays service and hurts your first-time resolution rates. The Arbitrage here is a Power Apps mobile solution with full offline capability. By using a smartphone or tablet, the field worker captures data, signatures, and GPS coordinates in real time. Because the app works without a signal and syncs automatically once connectivity returns, the need for manual transcription disappears entirely. You are capturing the truth of the job while it is actually happening. The metrics following deployment are usually immediate and dramatic. Data entry time frequently drops from hours to mere minutes because the app enforces required fields at the point of capture. Error rates fall below 1% because validation rules stop bad data from entering the system in the first place. When technicians have complete information at their fingertips, first-time resolution rates often jump by 25%. The economic impact of these changes compounds quickly. If 50 workers save 2 hours a day, the productivity gain can exceed $700,000 annually. When you compare that to an implementation cost of $50,000, the project pays for itself in about 3 weeks. This is one of the fastest returns on investment available in the Microsoft ecosystem. The licensing model for this is also highly efficient. Using Power Apps per user licensing for a field team is significantly cheaper than trying to build out custom infrastructure. Because the mobile offline capability is built in, you don't have to invest in expensive connectivity for remote locations. The system is designed to handle the realities of fieldwork without requiring constant oversight. The integration pattern is what makes the whole system work. Power Apps pushes data into Dataverse, which then triggers Power Automate to notify the back office the moment a job is finished. Power BI can then track productivity metrics in real time so dispatchers can see exactly who has capacity. The entire field operation, which used to be a black box, suddenly becomes completely visible to management. These secondary benefits continue to add value over time. You get better customer satisfaction from faster service and reduced vehicle idle time because technicians aren't stuck in the office. Safety compliance also improves because hazard reporting happens instantly rather than at the end of the week. When a technician sees a risk, they report it through the app and the risk is mitigated before it becomes an injury. Field workers are often your highest cost labor when you factor in their hourly rate, vehicle costs, and travel time. Every hour they spend typing into a spreadsheet is an hour they aren't generating revenue or solving a customer's problem. Mobile automation reclaims that time and redirects it toward productive work that actually moves the needle. There is a second, deeper arbitrage embedded in this data. The information captured in the field becomes a permanent part of your organizational knowledge. These historical records of what was done and what the outcome was are what feed your long-term analytics. This data allows you to identify patterns and predict equipment failures before they actually happen. An organization that relies on paper forms and manual entry can never optimize its routing or measure true performance. They are always looking in the rearview mirror. By capturing real-time data, you gain an informational advantage that your competitors simply cannot match. You see what is happening in the field while they are still waiting for filtered reports. This is why Frontline mobile deployment is a core arbitrage. It isn't just about giving field workers better tools to make their lives easier. It is about the fact that organizations are leaving millions of dollars on the table by failing to capture the data their workers generate every single day. Approval workflow compression. Let's look at the arbitrage every organization sees, but nobody actually quantifies. I'm talking about approval workflows, which are the invisible gears that determine how fast your company can move. These processes decide whether a critical decision happens in a few hours or drags on for several weeks. The baseline state in most companies is entirely predictable and painfully slow. Procurement, HR, and legal workflows usually require 5 to 7 individual approval steps, and since each person takes 1 to 3 days to click a button, the total cycle time stretches to over a month. A purchase request you submit on a Monday might not get the green light until late the following month, while a job offer for a top candidate takes 3 weeks to process through the system. Now we need to quantify the actual cost of this friction. Imagine a procurement team processing 500 purchase requests every month with an average 40-day approval cycle. During those 40 days, the business is effectively paralyzed while projects are delayed and vendors sit around waiting for a confirmation that never comes. You lose purchasing power because requests sit in a queue instead of executing, and you lose negotiating leverage because the vendor eventually assumes the deal is dead. The cost of delayed purchasing is rarely obvious because it stays hidden in the architecture of your business. It is embedded in higher vendor pricing, rush fees, and missed early payment discounts that quietly drain your budget. A $50,000 project delayed by 40 days costs far more than the initial price tag because you have to factor in the opportunity cost of the delay and the salary of a team sitting idle. This is where Power Automate solves the architectural arbitrage by defining rules based on amount, category, and budget owner. The system auto-routes tasks to the correct approver based on business logic and triggers an escalation if no action occurs within 24 hours. You can enable parallel approvals so 3 people can review a document at once instead of waiting in a line. The rules are defined once, and the system enforces them with a level of consistency that humans simply cannot match. The post-deployment metrics usually show up immediately. Average cycle times often drop from 40 days down to just 3 or 5, and 80% of requests move through without any manual intervention at all. Because the system routes to the right person the first time, escalations drop by 90%, and you no longer have to hunt through endless email chains to find out who is holding up the process. This financial impact compounds across the entire organization. Faster purchasing allows your team to negotiate better terms with vendors, and you eliminate emergency procurement costs because requests no longer pile up in a bottleneck. In the HR department, compressing an offer letter cycle from 14 days to 2 days means you actually land the talent you want. Candidates are much less likely to accept a competing offer while they are waiting for your internal bureaucracy to finish its paperwork. The deployment timeline for these solutions is remarkably fast. You can design and deploy a standard approval workflow in 2 to 3 weeks and see an immediate impact on your cycle time metrics. Unlike other efficiency improvements that take months to show results, approval acceleration provides a measurable win the moment the on switch is flipped. The governance model is what really matters here because approvals are where your business rules actually live. These rules define who can spend what and what documentation is required, yet they are currently buried in spreadsheets or the heads of senior staff. Power Automate makes these rules explicit and auditable, turning a best-guess process into a deterministic system. The real arbitrage is that slow approvals are incredibly expensive. They cost you in delayed projects, missed opportunities, and strained vendor relationships, while a fast approval system is relatively cheap to build. A Power Automate workflow might cost $15,000 to set up, but a delayed project that cascades through the company can easily cost hundreds of thousands. You are not automating these workflows just to be efficient. You are doing it because slow decisions are killing your organization's ability to compete in the market. The economics here are not about simple cost reduction. They are about using speed as a structural advantage. Dataverse as internal SaaS engine. Now we need to discuss the infrastructure arbitrage that makes every other automation possible. I am talking about Dataverse. Most organizations treat this as a simple database or a place to park data for a few power apps. They are wrong. Dataverse is actually an internal SaaS engine. It is the unified data backbone that allows for sophisticated automation, and shifting your perspective to this architectural reality changes how you build everything. The baseline state for most companies is total fragmentation. Finance uses one database, operations uses another, and the sales team is locked into Dynamics 365 while marketing runs a completely separate system. There is no single source of truth. When you need a customer record, you have to search multiple platforms, and when you need to understand cash flow, you spend hours reconciling numbers that don't match. This fragmentation is a massive hidden tax on your productivity. It is expensive in terms of labor and decision latency, and it leads to critical errors when data points contradict each other. A finance team spending 3 days every month just to reconcile customer data is a team that isn't doing any actual analysis. When your sales team cannot see a customer's history because it lives in 3 different silos, they are making decisions based on a guess. Dataverse solves this arbitrage by becoming the unified backbone where every application reads and writes to a single schema. This creates real-time data consistency across the board. Because it uses an API-first architecture, your development speed increases significantly. The architectural benefit is not subtle at all. Once the data layer exists, the time it takes to deploy a new application drops by 50%. You no longer have to design a custom database schema or build complex integrations for every single new tool you want to launch. You simply point a new Power App or a new workflow at the Dataverse environment that is already there. This is why Dataverse-based development is so much faster than building custom, siloed solutions. You are no longer building the foundation every time you want to put up a wall. The infrastructure is already running, and you are just adding features on top of it. The licensing arbitrage is equally important to understand. Dataverse capacity pricing is often dramatically cheaper than the cost of building and maintaining your own custom database infrastructure. You don't have to provision servers, manage backups, or worry about how the system will scale under load. The platform handles the heavy lifting, and you only pay for the capacity you actually use. If you scale this across an entire organization, the math becomes undeniable. Running 10 custom applications on 10 different databases might cost you $100,000 a year in infrastructure and maintenance. Running those same 10 applications on Dataverse might cost you less than $5,000 annually. The gap between those two numbers is where the arbitrage lives. The real power, however, is in the unification of your data. When every application writes to Dataverse, information flows in a way that makes sense for the business. The finance system writes a transaction, the sales system reads it to understand customer value, and the operations team sees it to check fulfillment status. Every department is finally operating on the same set of current, validated facts. This enables a level of analytics that is simply impossible in a fragmented environment. Your Power BI dashboards can consume unified data without a week of cleaning, and your machine learning models can train on consistent information. Compliance stops being a manual, painful process and becomes a natural property of the system itself. The transition to this model has to be handled carefully. You should migrate your highest value data first and establish a clear master data governance plan before building out incrementally. This isn't a rip and replace project that disrupts the whole company. It is a gradual consolidation where every new app makes the backbone stronger. There is also a secondary benefit regarding AI readiness. Dataverse is the gatekeeper for AI Builder and advanced analytics, providing the clean data that predictive models need to actually be accurate. Anomaly detection becomes possible because you finally have all your historical data sitting in one accessible place. The real arbitrage here is simple. Fragmented data is a liability. Every system integration costs you money, and every manual reconciliation costs you labor. Unified data, by contrast, is cheap and scalable. One Dataverse instance serves the entire company and eliminates the need for constant data cleanup. You aren't building on Dataverse because it is a shiny new technology. You are building on it because the cost of fragmentation is higher than the cost of unification. The economics are structural, and the move toward this model is architecturally inevitable. RPA and intelligent automation orchestration. Most organizations treat robotic process automation as a way to mimic human behavior, but they are fundamentally misunderstanding the architecture. We need to talk about the arbitrage sitting at the intersection of low-code and RPA. This is the space where Power Platform stops being a simple app builder and becomes an orchestration engine for legacy systems that you simply cannot replace. The foundational problem is the existence of high-volume, rule-based processes currently trapped in human hands. You see this in data entry teams, claims processors, and billing departments, which represent your most expensive manual workflows. Consider a team of 12 people processing 10,000 monthly transactions, where 30% of their day is wasted on system-to-system data movement. Because these applications do not talk to each other, humans are forced to transcribe data between incompatible screens, leading to a persistent error rate of at least 2%. Traditional RPA is a brittle, expensive sticking plaster. You build a bot to log into a legacy system, fill in forms, and click buttons just like a human would, but the moment the UI changes, the bot breaks. When the underlying business logic shifts, the bot fails, and suddenly you need a dedicated squad of RPA engineers just to keep the lights on. Between specialized engineering talent and predatory platform licensing, a single bot can cost $200,000 to maintain, meaning you can only afford to automate your absolute highest volume processes. Power Platform solves this arbitrage through a hybrid architecture. Instead of relying on a single point of failure, you combine cloud flows for orchestration with desktop flows for legacy UI interaction. AI Builder extracts data from unstructured documents, converting a brittle sequence into a flexible system. Take a standard claims processing workflow where documents arrive as PDFs and require manual entry into a legacy terminal. The traditional approach is to hire processors to read and type, which is slow, expensive, and prone to fatigue-driven mistakes. In the Power Platform model, AI Builder extracts the claim data automatically, while Power Automate validates that data against your policy database and routes it to the correct handler. A desktop flow then updates the legacy system, while structured data flows into Dataverse for long-term analytics, meaning the entire lifecycle is handled without human intervention. The real arbitrage is the cost structure. Power Automate licensing typically runs a few $100s monthly per automated workflow, which is a rounding error compared to traditional RPA platforms that charge per bot and per transaction. For a high-volume process, one flow handles thousands of transactions, making the economics of the platform structurally superior to anything else on the market. Deployment is equally aggressive. You can design, build, and deploy a hybrid automation in 4 to 6 weeks, often achieving full ROI within the first month through labor elimination. Unlike traditional RPA, which requires months of development and constant nursing, this automation is deployed quickly and adapts to business changes without collapsing. Scalability is no longer an infrastructure problem. Cloud-based orchestration scales to thousands of transactions without you buying a single new server, and desktop flows run on standard Windows machines. You do not need a department of RPA specialists. You need Power Automate developers who understand how your business actually functions. In a real-world insurance scenario, moving to intelligent document processing can drop processing time by 70%. When the error rate falls below 0.5%, your claims handlers can finally focus on complex cases requiring human judgment instead of mind-numbing data entry. The financial impact is easy to quantify. If a 12-person team costs $144,000 annually and generates $5,000 in monthly error corrections, the status quo is a liability. After automation, your labor cost drops to $30,000 for exception handling, and your annual savings climb to over $120,000. RPA is traditionally expensive because it is fragile and requires a specialized priesthood to manage. Power Platform is the opposite. It is flexible, it integrates with modern cloud services, and it costs a fraction of the legacy alternatives. You are not choosing between manual work and RPA. You are choosing between an expensive, outdated model and a cheap hybrid one. Power Platform wins because it solves the same architectural problem with greater flexibility and lower overhead. AI Builder and Copilot integration. There is a second arbitrage at the intersection of artificial intelligence and low-code development. This is the point where Power Platform stops being an automation engine and transforms into a prediction engine. Most organizations treat AI as a separate, high-altitude initiative involving data science teams and six-figure consulting engagements. The cost structure of custom machine learning is brutal, often requiring $300,000 in a year of development just to solve one specific use case. By the time the model is finally built, the business environment has often moved on, leaving you with an expensive tool for a problem that has already changed. AI Builder solves this by allowing business users to build predictive models in weeks. Because no data science team or custom infrastructure is required, the model integrates directly into your existing Power Apps or automate workflows. Consider a financial services firm trying to predict customer churn. The legacy approach involves hiring data scientists to spend 9 months preparing data and validating models at a cost of $200,000. With AI Builder, a business user uploads historical data, the system trains itself to 94% accuracy, and the model is in production within a month. This compressed timeline changes the fundamental economics of prediction. When a model takes 9 months to build, you only use it for the biggest problems. But when it takes 3 weeks, you apply it to everything. Demand forecasting, fraud detection, and lead scoring all become candidates for AI because the barrier to entry has vanished. There is also a secondary arbitrage here, Copilot integration. By using natural language prompts to generate workflows and apps, you reduce development time by half and enable non-technical staff to build sophisticated tools. If a business analyst needs to automate a complex approval, the old way involved writing a requirements doc and waiting weeks for a developer to build it. With Copilot, that same analyst describes the workflow in plain English, reviews the generated flow, and deploys it in 2 days. The real power is that Copilot is not replacing your developers, it is amplifying your business users. A finance manager who used to wait for reports can now build their own dashboards, shifting the bottleneck from technical skill to simple imagination. The cost structure has flipped entirely. Instead of hiring expensive developers for every routine flow, you train your existing staff to use Copilot at 1/10 of the cost. The time to value is 10 times faster, and the results are structurally more aligned with what the business actually needs. Governance is the only remaining hurdle, but Power Platform handles this through built-in performance dashboards. You can monitor for model drift and retrain your systems automatically as new data arrives, ensuring the system never becomes an unmanageable black box. The organizational benefit is that you no longer need to build massive backlogs of automation requests or wait for IT capacity. Business users build what they need in the moment, allowing IT to focus on high-level governance and complex integrations instead of basic development tasks. AI capabilities used to require massive budgets and specialized teams, but Copilot augmented development has made that model obsolete. The cost difference is structural, and the timeline difference is transformative for any organization willing to lean into it. You are not building AI because it is a trend. You are building it because the cost of prediction is finally affordable. When the timeline for a predictive model is measured in weeks instead of quarters, the economics become inevitable. This is the core arbitrage of the platform. It democratizes power that was once reserved for the elite. Workflow debt cleanup programs. Most organizations ignore a specific type of arbitrage until it transforms into a full-blown crisis. I am talking about workflow debt. This is the slow accumulation of hundreds of undocumented fragile automations built over a decade by employees who have long since left the building. The baseline state for a typical enterprise is entirely predictable. You have an IT department managing 500 workflows across 4 or 5 different platforms, and the internal entropy is staggering. 30% of these are orphaned, meaning the original owner departed years ago and nobody left behind knows why the workflow exists, what it actually does, or what happens to the business if it suddenly stops running. Another 40% lack any form of documentation, so while you might be able to read the logic if you happen to understand that specific platform, you can never truly understand the original intent. To make matters worse, 20% are redundant, because 3 different departments built nearly identical solutions simply because they didn't know the others existed. This is not a technology problem, but rather an organizational debt problem, where every workflow represents a decision made at a single point in time. These systems represent tribal knowledge that has been digitized but not managed, creating a risk profile that compounds every single day. When this debt finally manifests, the results are brutal. Workflow failures cause immediate process breakdowns, yet nobody understands the underlying dependencies well enough to fix them quickly. A simple change to a customer data structure can cause 3 downstream workflows to fail simultaneously, leaving your team to spend days troubleshooting because the original logic was never written down. During compliance audits, these gaps become official citations because the workflows lack proper audit trails. You cannot prove the system enforced the right business rule, and you certainly cannot prove it executed correctly. This is where Power Platform solves the arbitrage through a formal consolidation program. You audit every automation, identify the duplicates and the orphans, and then migrate high-value logic into Power Automate while retiring the legacy platforms entirely. The benefits of this consolidation are immediate and structural. You move toward a single control plane for all automations, which allows for standardized monitoring, centralized governance, and a massive reduction in licensing costs. You are no longer paying a premium for multiple disparate platforms that perform the same basic functions. I recommend a phased deployment approach over 6 to 12 months. You must prioritize high-volume, mission-critical workflows first and retire legacy platforms only as your coverage expands. Do not attempt to migrate every single line of logic at once, but instead build momentum with early wins and shut down legacy systems as they become empty. The financial impact of this move compounds over time. Consolidating your platforms typically reduces licensing costs by 40 to 60% because you are finally paying for one ecosystem instead of 5. Your operational overhead for maintenance will likely drop by half because your team is mastering a single platform instead of context switching between multiple systems. Your risk profile improves because every workflow is finally subject to change control, possesses an audit trail, and exists within a documented library. Governance improvements are equally structural. When all workflows are subject to change control and performance metrics are tracked automatically, you gain a level of visibility that was previously impossible. You can finally see which workflows are failing, which ones are dragging down performance, and which ones are sitting idle and wasting resources. The organizational benefit is where the real value lies. Your IT team can finally refocus from constant firefighting to strategic initiatives, as they are no longer spending half their day troubleshooting broken scripts built by people who don't work there anymore. As visibility increases, process owners finally understand which automations support their specific business goals, allowing them to make informed decisions about future optimizations. The real arbitrage here is simple. Workflow debt is incredibly expensive. It costs you in firefighting, it costs you in remediation, and it costs you in unmanaged risk. However, consolidation is relatively cheap, often costing between $50,000 and $150,000. Compare that to a major workflow failure that cascades through your organization, which can easily cost hundreds of thousands in lost productivity and emergency repairs. You are not consolidating these workflows because it feels efficient or looks clean on a slide. You are consolidating because the cost of carrying that debt is significantly higher than the cost of the cleanup. These economics are not subtle. They are existential. An organization running 500 undocumented workflows is sitting on a ticking time bomb, and one critical failure is all it takes to enter permanent crisis mode. Power Platform consolidation gives you back the control and confidence you lost years ago. It allows you to optimize your business based on actual data, instead of guessing what a legacy script might be doing. That is why cleaning up workflow debt is a core arbitrage. It isn't because the consolidation process is complex or technically impressive, but because the cost of doing nothing is a price you can no longer afford to pay. The economics of this transition are inevitable. M&A rapid integration kits. There is a specific arbitrage that emerges during moments of massive organizational transformation, specifically during mergers and acquisitions. These are the moments when 2 separate organizations attempt to become one, and the complexity of that integration either accelerates your timeline or stalls your value realization entirely. The baseline state of a merger is usually a mess. One company acquires a competitor only to discover 15 different CRM systems, 8 ERP instances, and dozens of custom applications that have no way of communicating. Nobody knows which system serves as the source of truth for customer data or which one is actually responsible for billing. The initial integration estimate usually comes back at $5 to $20 million with a timeline of 2 years. While the business case for the acquisition depends on hitting synergy targets quickly, those targets are constantly delayed by the sheer weight of technical complexity. And this is where Power Platform functions as an integration kit. By using Power Automate and Dataverse, you can standardize data schemas and create connectors for legacy systems to enable rapid data consolidation. This kit becomes a strategic asset that can accelerate your integration timeline by several months. You can use pre-built templates to handle the most common integration scenarios, such as master data management workflows that consolidate customer records across multiple systems. Logic for duplicate detection and merging identifies when the same customer exists in 3 different databases, while system of record designations establish exactly which platform owns the data. This ensures that your audit trails prove the consolidation happened correctly and legally. The deployment timeline for this approach is dramatically compressed. An integration kit can be deployed in 30 to 60 days, allowing data consolidation to begin almost immediately. This reduces your parallel run period from 6 months down to just 4 weeks. Instead of paying for old and new systems to run side by side for half a year while you validate the migration, you cut over faster and realize your synergies much sooner. The cost advantage here is structural rather than incremental. An integration kit might cost $500,000 to build, but it saves millions in manual effort and cuts your timeline in half. The return on investment isn't a guess, it is immediate and measurable. Consider a retail company that acquires a regional competitor and finds 3 inventory systems, 2 point-of-sale platforms, and 4 separate customer databases. A traditional integration would take 6 months and cost $3 million, but a Power Platform kit can consolidate those inventory systems in 30 days. By the time you reach the 60-day mark, the entire stack is consolidated for a fraction of the traditional cost. In this scenario, synergy realization is accelerated by 5 months, resulting in millions of dollars in direct savings. The organizational benefits continue to compound long after the initial move. Faster integration means less disruption to your operations and a much better experience for your customers who now see a unified brand. Your sales teams gain a complete view of customer history, while your finance department can finally consolidate reporting without manual spreadsheets. There is also a second hidden arbitrage embedded in this strategy. The integration kit you build is a reusable asset. You build it once for the first acquisition, but then you use it for the second, the third, and the fourth. The cost of the software amortizes across every deal you make. By the time you reach your third acquisition, the kit has paid for itself several times over. This is why the most successful strategic acquirers build integration playbooks. They standardize on the Power Platform and build kits that work across their entire portfolio to make every deal faster and cheaper than the last. They gain a massive competitive advantage in the M&A market because they can integrate faster than their rivals. They can justify higher acquisition prices because their integration risk is lower and their path to profit is much shorter. The real arbitrage is that M&A integration is traditionally expensive because systems are siloed and manual data consolidation takes months. Power Platform kits change that math by making consolidation fast and predictable. They compress your timelines from months to weeks and drop your costs from millions to thousands. You are not building these integration kits because they are technologically elegant or fun to design. You are building them because the success of an acquisition depends entirely on the speed of integration. Every month you delay is a month where you aren't realizing the value that justified the deal in the first place. That is why rapid integration kits are a core arbitrage. The cost of a slow integration is always higher than the cost of building the tools to fix it. The organizations that master this rapid integration win the M&A game while everyone else struggles with delays and disappointment. Licensing arbitrage and cost optimization. Most organizations leave money on the table because they fundamentally misunderstand how Power Platform pricing actually works. They default to per-user licensing, which is a predictable way to overpay, especially when per-flow or process licensing is significantly cheaper for high-volume automations. The baseline state is easy to calculate. Imagine an organization with 500 Power Apps users paying $20 per head every month. That adds up to $10,000 monthly, which sounds reasonable until you look at how people actually use the system. In reality, 80% of those people only touch 2 or 3 apps, while the remaining 20% are the true power users who live inside the platform. The math is brutal because you are paying a full premium for casual users who might only open an app once a week. This is where you solve the arbitrage by shifting that 80% of casual users over to per-flow licensing. A shared app serving those 400 people might only cost $200 a month under a per-flow model. Compare that to the $8,000 you were spending to license them individually, and you realize the difference isn't just a small saving, it is a structural shift in your budget. Choosing the right licensing model changes how you architect your entire solution. Instead of building a Power App that requires every single person to have their own license, you design a shared application that multiple people can access. A high-volume automation that serves your entire company might cost $300 a month for a process license, whereas licensing every individual who interacts with it would cost thousands. Capacity planning is the tool you use to balance these costs. Per-user licensing is great for interactive personal tools, but per-flow licensing is built to scale for high-volume work. A smart hybrid approach means you don't license everyone. You license your power users and your heavy-duty flows, then let everyone else use shared applications to get their work done. There is also a hidden optimization trick involving the Microsoft 365 E3 and E5 seats you likely already pay for. Many organizations don't realize these subscriptions already include Power Apps capacity, meaning they are buying extra licenses for things they already own. You don't need more seats. You just need to audit what is already sitting in your tenant. Your transition strategy has to start with a hard look at current usage. You need to identify who is actually a power user and who is just stopping by. Then migrate those casual users to per-flow models. Consolidating redundant apps so everyone uses the same tool instead of their own siloed versions can cut your licensing bill by 50 to 70% without losing any features. The financial impact of this move compounds over time. If you drop your monthly spend from $10,000 down to $3,000, you suddenly have $7,000 of found money every month. That is capital you can use to fund new automations, improve your governance, or speed up your entire digital transformation roadmap. Compliance also plays a role here because your licensing model dictates how you manage capacity and count your users. When you move to per-flow licensing, your governance team stops tracking headcounts and starts monitoring flow executions and transaction volumes. The metrics change, the oversight changes, and the entire cost structure becomes more efficient. The real arbitrage comes down to how you think about your people. Most companies license based on how many people need access, but Power Platform forces you to think about how you deliver capability. The choice between individual licensing and shared access will change your costs by an order of magnitude. Take a manufacturing company with 1,000 employees as an example. They might pay $4,000 a month for 200 individual users, but if they consolidate those needs into 10 shared applications using per-flow licensing, that cost drops to $2,000. It is the exact same capability for half the price. Per-user licensing assumes every person needs their own bucket of resources, while per-flow licensing assumes they are all drawing from a shared pool. For big shared processes, the flow model is almost always the winner. The organizations that actually succeed are the ones that understand this distinction and build their architecture to match the math. You aren't doing this because you have a passion for spreadsheets. You are doing it because the economics of the platform create a massive incentive to consolidate and share resources. Understanding the licensing model is how you find the money to fund your entire automation strategy. Licensing arbitrage is the only way to make Power Platform sustainable at scale. The price gap between these two models is so wide that it determines whether your program lives or dies. If you ignore the math, your costs will eventually outpace your value. Security, governance, and risk mitigation. There is a specific type of arbitrage that separates companies that scale Power Platform from the ones that just create a mess. It comes down to security, governance, and risk mitigation. This is the invisible infrastructure that lets you move fast without creating a massive liability for the company. Most people see governance as a handbrake or something IT uses to stop business users from being productive. They are wrong. Governance is actually the floor that makes scaling possible in the first place. Without it, you just have sprawl that creates security holes, but with it, the Power Platform becomes a controlled and auditable enterprise asset. The baseline risk is terrifying when you look at the numbers. Imagine 500 apps built by employees with zero oversight, where 40% of them are dumping sensitive data into random folders. When auditors find these gaps, you aren't just looking at an inefficiency, you are looking at a massive exposure where one data breach leaves you explaining to a regulator why customer info was sitting in an unmanaged app. A solid governance framework solves this by creating clear boundaries. You use an environment strategy to separate your experiments from your production tools, and you use DLP policies to control exactly where data is allowed to go. Role-based access control ensures that the right people are building and approving, while automated lifecycles keep an audit trail of every change. Everything starts with environment tiering. You have personal zones for playing around, green zones for low-risk shared apps, and amber zones for business-critical work that needs an IT review. For the high-stakes financial or compliance systems, you use a red zone with total control. This lets people move fast on the small stuff while keeping the big stuff safe. DLP policies are what stop your sensitive data from leaking into the wrong places. You can block external cloud storage in your production environments and require a formal sign-off for any connector that touches customer records. This isn't a simple yes or no system. It is a graduated approach that matches your security posture to the actual risk of the data. Implementing Arbitrage means everyone knows their lane. Your citizen developers stay in the green zones, your professional developers handle the complex integrations, and your architects manage the high-security red zones. When the roles are defined and the permissions are locked down, the system itself prevents people from making dangerous mistakes. You also need a center of excellence because governance doesn't happen by accident. A small dedicated team can provide the training and oversight needed to stop rogue development before it starts. A COE might cost you a few $100,000 a year, but that is a bargain compared to the $1 million price tag of a major security breach caused by unmanaged sprawl. The real power of the platform shows up when you automate your compliance. Because the Power Platform tracks everything, you get audit trails and access controls built into the workflow itself. You don't have to do manual reviews because the system is enforcing the rules while it runs. Good governance actually makes your security better than it was before. Centralized monitoring lets you spot threats faster, and standardized controls stop the common mistakes that lead to vulnerabilities. When you have an audit trail, you can actually prove that your security policies are being followed in real time. The cost of doing this is easy to justify. Investing in a COE is significantly cheaper than paying for the cleanup after a data leak or a regulatory fine. Governance isn't a line item expense, it is an insurance policy for your digital assets. There is a second arbitrage here that most people miss. Governance actually enables delegation. When your policies are clear and the enforcement is automated, your business units can build what they need without waiting for IT to approve every single button click. The COE sets the guardrails and the platform makes sure nobody drives off the road. The uncomfortable truth is that ungoverned platforms are fast but dangerous, while governed platforms are both fast and safe. You don't have to trade speed for security. A proper framework lets you deploy rapidly because the boundaries are already baked into the system. You aren't setting up these rules because IT wants to be in charge. You are doing it because unmanaged growth is more expensive than controlled scaling. Security incidents and compliance fines will always cost more than a proactive investment in a governance team. This is why risk mitigation is a core part of scaling. The cost of the mess is always higher than the cost of the cleanup. The most successful organizations are the ones that invest in these guardrails on day one. You can choose to govern now or you can pay for the chaos later, but governing early is always the cheaper option. Measuring ROI and building the business case. The arbitrage thesis is not a matter of faith, and it requires a level of measurement that most IT departments find uncomfortable. Fuzzy metrics and vague promises of efficiency will eventually undermine your credibility with finance and executive stakeholders who speak the language of hard capital. You cannot simply walk into a CFO's office and claim that the Power Platform is cheaper than a pro-code alternative without bringing the receipts. You need numbers, you need proof, and you need a business case that survives the cold scrutiny of an audit. Establishing baseline metrics is the first critical step in this process, which means you must document the actual cost of the current manual process. You need to calculate how many labor hours the task consumes and multiply that by a fully loaded hourly rate that includes benefits, overhead, and even the physical space those employees occupy. Beyond just the payroll, you must measure the cycle time to see how long a process takes from start to finish while quantifying the hidden costs of error rates and rework. If a process fails, what is the actual price of that failure in terms of compliance fines or operational risk? Once you deploy a solution, your post-deployment metrics must measure the actual impact rather than the intended one. You should be tracking the specific time savings per transaction and the reduction in error rates while monitoring exactly how many users are actually adopting the tool. These metrics need to be pulled directly from system data because vague estimates and gut feelings have no place in a professional architectural review. Financial modeling is where your business case finally gains teeth and becomes credible to the people who sign the checks. You must calculate the total cost of ownership by adding software licensing, implementation, training, and governance, then compare that total against the baseline manual process and a hypothetical pro-code alternative. In a healthy ecosystem, this comparison should show that the Power Platform is dramatically cheaper than both the manual status quo and the traditional development route. The actual ROI calculation is a straightforward piece of math where you take the annual benefit, subtract the annual cost, and divide by that cost to find your percentage. You should be targeting a minimum of 300% ROI in the first year, but you can expect that number to climb toward 500% as you scale additional automations on the same underlying platform. When the math is this obvious, the business case moves from a suggestion to a compelling architectural necessity. The payback period is often the most critical metric for securing executive buy-in because it tells leadership exactly when they get their money back. You should target 6 months or less for high-impact automations, though 12 months is usually acceptable for larger strategic initiatives that require more foundational work. When you can show a CFO that an automation pays for itself in half a year, the conversation shifts from a discussion about costs to a strategic dialogue about capital allocation. Secondary metrics help strengthen the case by highlighting the reduction in the IT backlog and the improvement in overall employee satisfaction. When business users start building their own solutions, the constant stream of minor requests disappears, which reduces burnout and allows your core team to focus on higher value architecture. You will also see process quality improve as error rates and compliance findings drop, which ultimately increases your organization's time to market for new capabilities. Benchmarking your results against industry standards adds a final layer of bulletproof credibility to your proposal. Typical Power Platform deployments achieve between 50 and 70% cost reduction and similar levels of cycle time compression while pushing error rates below 1%. If your projected results match or exceed these established benchmarks, it becomes very difficult for stakeholders to argue against the investment. Continuous measurement is not a one-time event, but an essential part of managing architectural entropy over the long term. You should establish a dashboard to track these key metrics monthly, using the realized ROI to adjust your deployment priorities and communicate wins back to the business. When finance sees that your first phase delivered a massive return, they are far more likely to fund the next one. And when operations sees a 70% drop in cycle time, they will start demanding more. Success compounds, and that momentum is what sustains a platform. The real arbitrage here is that most organizations are flying blind and building automations based on nothing more than a vague intuition. They have no idea if a specific tool paid for itself or if it is actually worth scaling across the enterprise. Organizations that measure rigorously are the only ones that truly understand where to invest next, and they are the only ones who know which processes deserve to be automated first. Measurement is what transforms the Power Platform from a perceived cost center into a strategic profit center for the business. It moves the conversation from nice-to-have tools to must-have infrastructure that the company cannot afford to ignore. The organizations that win are the ones that treat data as a requirement, while those that skip the math leave significant money on the table. You are not building these business cases because you enjoy playing with spreadsheets or filling out forms. You are building them because measurement determines whether your program survives the next round of budget cuts or becomes a permanent strategic priority. The economics of these systems are not subtle. They are existential to the survival of the digital workplace. That is why measuring ROI is a non-negotiable part of the architect's job. It is not because the metrics are complex, but because the organizations that measure are the only ones that scale successfully over time. You have a choice between measuring your way to growth or skipping the data and watching your funding stagnate. The competitive moat and strategic positioning. There's a specific arbitrage that separates organizations treating the Power Platform as a tactical tool from those treating it as a strategic engine. This distinction is not just a matter of perspective. It is an existential reality that determines whether you gain a lasting competitive advantage or simply become a commodity. Most organizations approach the platform reactively, building an app only when a specific business unit screams loud enough for a solution. They see that the cost is lower than pro code and the timeline is faster, so they solve the immediate problem and move on to the next fire. They never stop to think about strategic positioning or how to build a competitive moat because they are too busy solving today's minor inconveniences. Strategic organizations operate on a different frequency by asking what happens when they can deploy 10 capabilities in the time a competitor deploys 2. They look at the structural advantage of integrating the platform across the entire enterprise rather than leaving it in isolated silos. When every business unit is building on a common platform instead of waiting in an IT queue, you have created a structural competitive advantage that is very hard to replicate. The most immediate advantage is your time to market, which allows you to outpace anyone relying on traditional development cycles. While a competitor spends 6 months building a single capability with a pro-code team, you can deploy an equivalent solution in 3 weeks and start iterating. By the time they launch their first version, you are already on version 3 and have months of customer feedback and real-world learning under your belt. This speed advantage compounds over time. And as your organization learns faster, the gap between you and the competition widens into a chasm. Your cost advantage compounds right alongside your speed, as every capability you deploy costs a fraction of what your competitors are paying. You can take those massive savings and reinvest them into more capabilities, market expansion, or better customer acquisition strategies. Because your cost structure is fundamentally lower, your capacity to out-invest the competition increases with every single app you put into production. There is also a third dimension to this moat that most people overlook, and that is the concept of organizational learning. Every time you build on the platform, your citizen developers get sharper, your IT team masters new integrations, and your internal best practices become more refined. This means your next deployment will be even faster and cheaper than the last one, creating a learning curve that competitors simply cannot catch. A year into this journey, your organization might be deploying new features in 2 weeks at 70% of the original cost. You can scale to more business units because you have a trained army of developers, and the competitive gap is no longer measured in weeks, but in entire fiscal quarters. You are moving at a velocity that makes it mathematically impossible for a traditional organization to keep up. This strategic positioning creates a form of organizational lock-in that is far more valuable than simple vendor lock-in. As you build more integrated capabilities, the cost of switching to another system becomes prohibitively high because of the massive investment you've made in training and knowledge. You begin to benefit from internal network effects and an ecosystem maturity that creates its own unstoppable momentum. Even your ability to attract and retain talent becomes a competitive advantage in this model. Organizations known for low-code excellence attract people who want to build things quickly, while laggards struggle to find custom developers willing to work at premium rates. Your talent moat grows because you are offering people the chance to build modern capabilities instead of spending their careers maintaining crumbling legacy systems. Deep participation in the ecosystem can even open up entirely new revenue streams as your organization becomes a master of the platform. You might find yourself becoming a partner or a consultant to others, and organizations that master this rapid delivery model often become highly attractive acquisition targets. Acquirers are willing to pay a significant premium for a company that has figured out how to deliver high-value IP at a low cost. The real arbitrage is that strategic positioning creates a compounding advantage that is nearly impossible to disrupt once it takes hold. Faster delivery, lower costs, and organizational learning all feed into each other to create a virtuous cycle of growth. The organizations that start this process early gain a lead that only gets larger as time goes on. You aren't deploying the Power Platform strategically because the software is elegant or the interface is pretty. You are doing it because the companies that master rapid, low-cost delivery are the ones that will eventually dominate their respective markets. The time-to-market advantage eventually becomes an insurmountable wall for anyone trying to compete with you. That is why your strategic positioning is the only thing that actually matters in the long run. Tactical organizations are busy optimizing for today's problems, while strategic organizations are building the infrastructure for tomorrow's dominance. The gap between these two groups grows every single quarter, and the only real question is whether you are the one building the moat or the one trying to swim across it. Objection demolition, the anti-power platform arguments. Now let's address the objections, specifically the justifications organizations use to explain why the Power Platform supposedly won't work for them. These are the same excuses used to defend manual processes or bloated, expensive pro-code solutions that take years to ship. These objections are predictable, they are frequent, and they are architecturally flawed. I am going to dismantle them one by one. The first objection is the most common dismissal. It's just SharePoint toys. This argument claims the Power Platform is merely a departmental tool for building simple forms rather than an enterprise-grade solution. It suggests the platform is unsuitable for mission-critical workflows, but this perspective is architecturally incorrect. Microsoft architected the Power Platform as an enterprise engine capable of handling mission-critical logic while integrating with ERPs, mainframes, and legacy systems. It scales to billions of records and supports thousands of concurrent users without breaking a sweat. This objection confuses low code with low capability, assuming that because something is fast to build, it must be limited in scope. In reality, the platform supports complex logic and sophisticated integrations, and the organizations dismissing it as a toy are usually the ones still waiting 6 months for a custom dev team to open a ticket. Second is the concern regarding security and data leakage. Critics argue that the Power Platform stores sensitive data in uncontrolled locations or allows data to flow to unauthorized destinations. This is a failure of governance, not a failure of the platform itself. The system includes robust DLP policies that restrict connector usage, alongside encryption at rest and audit trails that provide a complete record of data handling. When you implement role-based access control, you prevent unauthorized access entirely. This objection assumes an environment of ungoverned sprawl, but a governed Power Platform actually reduces risk compared to the shadow IT of unmonitored spreadsheets and email chains. Centralized monitoring enables faster threat detection, and standardized controls prevent the common vulnerabilities found in manual work. Organizations worried about leakage are almost always the ones that skipped the governance framework. Third, we hear that licensing costs are too high. The argument is that $20 per user per month becomes unsustainable when you have thousands of employees. This objection confuses a specific licensing model with the actual cost structure of the platform. While per-user licensing exists, per-flow or per-app models allow a shared application to serve 400 users for about $200 monthly. If you used per-user licensing for that same group, your bill would jump to $8,000 a month. The licensing model determines the cost structure, and organizations that understand licensing arbitrage pay dramatically less than those that do not. This objection assumes that the most expensive path is the only option, which is simply not the case. The organizations complaining about costs are usually the ones that fail to optimize their model. The fourth objection focuses on shadow IT chaos. The fear is that ungoverned citizen development creates a graveyard of rogue apps and duplicate functionality. This risk is real if you ignore governance, but it vanishes when you implement a zoned governance model. Environment tiering restricts what can be built and where it can live, while DLP policies prevent unauthorized data movement across the tenant. By establishing a center of excellence, you provide the oversight necessary to turn chaos into a structured pipeline. This objection assumes a total lack of control, but a governed approach enables rapid deployment within safe, predefined boundaries. Organizations experiencing chaos are the ones that skip the setup phase, whereas those with frameworks in place scale their citizen development successfully. Fifth is the idea that professional developers resent it. There is a belief that developers see the Power Platform as a threat to their jobs or a devaluation of their specialized skills. This objection fundamentally misunderstands the value proposition of low-code. The Power Platform is not a replacement for pro-code. It is a necessary complement that allows professional developers to focus on complex logic and high-level architecture. In a hybrid model, pro developers stop wasting time on repetitive CRUD apps and start focusing on strategic innovation. Citizen developers stop waiting for IT and start building the tactical tools they need to do their jobs. Organizations seeing resentment are the ones that pitched the platform as a threat instead of an opportunity to offload the boring work. Sixth, people point to scalability limits, claiming the platform cannot handle enterprise volume or high transaction processing. This is technically incorrect. Dataverse handles billions of records, and the API limits are high enough to satisfy the vast majority of enterprise use cases. For the rare scenarios that require unlimited scale, a hybrid approach combining Power Automate with Azure Functions solves the problem. This objection assumes the Power Platform is the wrong tool for high-volume work, but most enterprise workflows are rule-based rather than algorithmically complex. The platform handles these high-volume, rule-based tasks with extreme efficiency. Organizations hitting limits are usually trying to force the platform into a scenario where custom high-compute development was actually the right choice. Finally, there is the vendor lock-in argument. Critics say the platform is proprietary, that data in Dataverse is trapped, and that workflows cannot be migrated. This is partially true but largely irrelevant. Every platform creates a switching cost, whether it is Microsoft, AWS, or a custom-built stack. Data in Dataverse is fully exportable, and while migrating workflows requires effort, the cost is often lower than rewriting a massive pro-code application. The real question is not whether a switching cost exists, but whether the value delivered justifies that cost. For most organizations, the competitive advantage gained from rapid deployment far outweighs the theoretical risk of needing to leave the ecosystem later. These objections are not reasons to avoid the platform, they are reasons to implement it correctly. Governance eliminates the security risk, licensing optimization fixes the cost concerns, and proper architecture removes the scalability limits. Organizations that overcome these hurdles scale successfully, while those that use them as excuses remain stuck with slow, expensive legacy systems. The organizational transformation path. Scaling the Power Platform from a tactical tool to a strategic engine requires a total organizational transformation. This is not just a technology deployment where you buy licenses and hope the business users figure it out. It requires real change management, a shift in culture, and a serious investment in both people and processes. Phase 1 covers the first 3 months and focuses on establishing your governance foundation. During this time, you must create your center of excellence, identify high-impact pilot cases, and secure the executive sponsorship needed to move forward. This phase is about laying the groundwork and establishing the guardrails that will eventually allow for safe, rapid scaling. You need leadership alignment before a single app is deployed to production. The center of excellence is the most critical piece of this puzzle, usually requiring a dedicated team of 4 to 6 people to set policies and provide templates. This team is not a bottleneck. It is the foundation that ensures scaling doesn't turn into a disaster. Phase 2 occurs between months 4 and 6. This is when you deploy your 3 to 5 high-impact pilots and measure the results with absolute rigor. You must communicate these wins to the rest of the organization while training your first cohort of citizen developers. This phase is about proving the model works and demonstrating that the platform delivers the promised ROI. When the finance department sees that an automation delivered a full return on investment in the first quarter, they will fund the next phase. When operations sees a 70% drop in cycle time, they will start requesting more automations. Phase 3 spans months 7 through 12, where you scale based on those pilot results. You expand the citizen developer community and refine your governance based on the lessons you learned in the first 6 months. This is the transition from a pilot to a full-scale program. You are no longer deploying random automations. You are deploying according to strategic priority and adjusting based on measurable impact. By the end of the first year, you should have a functioning ecosystem where the Center of Excellence provides the oversight for a growing army of builders. Phase 4 takes place in year 2 and focuses on consolidation. You begin migrating legacy workflows to the Power Platform and retiring the fragmented systems that have accumulated over the years. This is also the time to optimize your licensing and expand the platform into new business units that were previously on the sidelines. You are moving from a collection of multiple tools to a single unified platform. This consolidation reduces technical debt and simplifies the overall architectural landscape of the company. Phase 5 is year 3 and beyond, where the Power Platform becomes the standard for all business applications. At this stage, IT focuses almost entirely on integration and governance, while citizen developers drive continuous improvement. The platform is no longer a new thing, it is simply how the organization builds, automates, and innovates. The transformation is complete when the technology fades into the background and the capability becomes part of the company's DNA. Throughout all these phases, organizational change management is the thread that holds everything together. You must communicate the vision consistently and celebrate every win publicly to maintain momentum. Addressing concerns transparently and providing constant training ensures that the workforce feels supported rather than replaced. Skill development is not an optional cost, it is the foundation of the entire strategy. Citizen developers need to understand data governance and security, while the IT team needs to master platform engineering and integration. Budgeting for this transformation follows a predictable pattern. An initial investment of $200,000 to $500,000 typically yields an ROI of over 300%. As you realize these savings, you reinvest them into expanded deployment, creating a virtuous cycle of increased capability and reduced operational costs. By the third year, you aren't even spending a traditional budget on automation anymore. You are simply funding new innovations using the massive savings generated by the previous ones. Executive alignment is the final essential ingredient. The CFO wants cost reduction, the CIO wants risk management, and the COO wants process improvement. The Power Platform addresses all of these priorities simultaneously. It reduces costs through automation, manages risk through centralized governance, and improves processes through workflow optimization. When executives understand this alignment, they become your strongest champions. If they don't understand it, they will eventually become your biggest obstacles. The real transformation here is not technical, it is organizational. It is the shift from IT-centric development to business-led innovation. It is the move from waiting for a developer to building exactly what you need to solve a problem. The Power Platform is just the tool that facilitates this change. The true transformation is in how your organization builds its own capabilities. Organizations that execute this shift gain a structural competitive advantage that is very difficult to replicate. They move faster, they cost less, and they learn more than their competitors. The choice is whether to transform proactively or wait until you are forced to react. One leads to leadership, the other to a permanent state of catching up. Closing argument, the arbitrage thesis. Most organizations treat Power Platform as a self-service playground for citizen developers building hobby apps. They are wrong. In reality, it is a high-leverage control plane for capturing enterprise value that traditional models systematically miss. The arbitrage is simple and brutal. Manual processes cost $28,500 per employee annually, while pro-code solutions cost between $150,000 and $500,000 per capability. Power Platform costs $5,000 to $25,000 per capability and deploys in weeks. Governed, strategic deployment creates compounding competitive advantage through faster time to market and a lower cost structure. Higher quality and improved compliance follow naturally. Organizations that master this arbitrage will outcompete those still relying on manual entropy or expensive pro-code solutions. The question is not whether to adopt Power Platform, it is whether you can afford not to. Subscribe to the M365 FM podcast for more deep dive insights on Microsoft 365, Copilot, Azure, security, and the modern workplace. Leave a review and share this episode with colleagues who need to understand the economic reality of low-code platforms. Connect with me on LinkedIn to share your Power Platform arbitrage stories, challenges, or questions. Help me find the next topic by engaging with your insights on how you are capturing this value in your organization.